Take, for instance, the case of disclosure of candidate details. 7 or 8 years ago, we started this process of identifying criminals in politics. The horror that one of our colleagues expressed about the politicians. When we tried to do that, people were shocked that actually we could do that. And these are not ordinary people. These are MPs and ministers and very, very influential people, very wealthy people, very powerful people. And these crimes are not small-time stuff. This is not about a check that is bounced. These are murders. These are abductions. These are rapes. These are organized crime. These are serious stuff. So people were horrified at the thought that somebody actually could take them on. We took them on. Nothing happened. They all had to respond ultimately. Everybody, many of these murderers whom I named, they all came to me and said, "Sir, what you say is absolutely true. Things are even worse than what you're saying." And of course, each has a story, personal story, why that fellow had to do what he did. In my life, I'm a hero. In your life, you're a hero. Nobody's a villain in his own life. Therefore, he always comes up with his own explanation, like many Hindi films. But then they go on to say, "So things must change." But will they change? There's not one Indian who says things must not change. They're only skeptical about our capacity to actually bring about a change. Therefore, merely describing the symptoms of India will not take us anywhere. Let's understand the answers and work together to get the answers become a reality. Take the political funding reform. I don't want to go into details, but it suffices to say that the United States, a country with enormously rich public discourse, tremendous quality of research going on all the time about politics, about public work and this and that, for 30 years could not get simple improvements in their campaign finance, what they call political funding. 30 years, since 1974, 32 years now. In the 2000 elections, that was actually the major campaign issue. Senator John McCain, in his presidential bid, made it the central issue, and all the youngsters of that country were excited, energized. Though he lost the nomination by a whisker, that became the Republican Party platform. George Bush finally won. Despite that, all they have is a very feeble law called Feingold-McCain law. In 2003 in India, these very parliamentarians whom we revile, all of them came together unanimously and enacted a law, which is a wonderful one relative to American standards. If only such a law is enacted in the United States, the American political process would have been cleaned up. Except that this is India, therefore it's only an important step forward, but it's not enough. Much more needs to be done because our crisis is far more complicated. But what's important is what they could not do for 30 years, the world's oldest democracy. Our parliamentarians could do without firing a shot, very quietly, burying the hatchet, unanimously in Parliament, a remarkable piece of legislation. Take the 91st Amendment to the Constitution enacted again in 2002-2003. For years we've been talking about the defections. All this, there's an infamous phrase that a great son of Maharashtra coined, Y.B. Chavan, about IR-arms and GAIA-arms, about Haryana at the time he was talking about. Everybody knows that if individuals defect, then they are punished. If groups defect, they are rewarded. The 91st Amendment, a constitutional amendment unanimously enacted by Parliament. It said, whether 1 or 100, if they defect, they all lose their jobs. That's why Narayan Rane had to resign before defecting. That's why Siddaramaiah is resigned just yesterday, today, if you read the newspapers, because he's now switching over. That's why in Bihar there had to be a new election rather than cobbling together some kind of a coalition. I'm not saying it's a panacea, as Arvind said, but something people believed would not happen, actually happened. The parties came together. And then 40 years ago, another great son of Western India, the former chief minister of the then Mumbai state, Morarji Bhai, as chairman of the first Administrative Reforms Commission, he recommended that, look, you must have some kind of a ratio for the ministers. You can't have jumbo jet cabinets. Maharashtra at one stage had, I think, some 80 or 90 ministers, if I remember right, because of the coalition compulsions. UP had 98 ministers at that time. And then the parliament enacted a constitutional amendment. It said the strength of the ministry, cabinet, not cabinet, the ministry, council of ministers, cannot be beyond 15% of the strength of the assembly. This is a remarkable piece of self-denial. All the parties came together. That's the reason why your chief minister is not able to accommodate all these ambitions and aspirations. It happened in this country. Then right to information, a wonderful piece of legislation. And then there are many others on the anvil. We have a local courts bill that is now very soon to become a reality. It will be introduced in Parliament hopefully very soon. There is a minor haggling going on about who will fund and how much. It doesn't cost much money. I'm sure the government will have the good sense to quickly go through with that. An Indian judicial service to improve the quality of justice system in the country. the cooperatives, a constitutional amendment to make them independent of state control, and many, many more things. Are all these enough? Are we on the path to El Dorado? Is India safe? Not at all. The central question is the nature of politics, the questions that you raised about politics and politicians. There are outstanding politicians even today in every party, and some parties are remarkably honest. The left parties, for instance, you cannot be more moral and ethical than the left parties. You may or may not agree with their policies. That's not very, very important. That discussion and that debate and clash of ideas is critical for a democracy. There are individuals in your own state, just to name one or two. Take Suresh Prabhu from Shiv Sena, not a great party by any standards, even if I'm standing in Mumbai and saying this. But Suresh Prabhu's integrity is beyond reasonable doubt. And what happened to Suresh Prabhu? He did an outstanding job as power minister, and his party leader called up the Prime Minister and said, throw him out. The Prime Minister pleaded and said, look, we need people like him, young people, competent people, men and women of integrity, who have a vision and leadership, who are problem solvers. Now please allow him to continue. If you want, I'll give you another portfolio to your party. What did his leader say? क्या बोल रहे हैं आप? ये न खाता है न खिलाता है. I spent so many crores to build this party, and this fellow talks about integrity. I put him in the power ministry, a money-making machine, and this fellow doesn't make money for me. He talks about honesty and integrity. What do I get out of it? Throw him out. Poor Suresh had to go out. There was no choice. There are compulsions in politics today. Politicians are not villains. They are victims of a vicious cycle. And political parties are trapped in that vicious cycle. Even if individually the leaders and some of the parliamentarians want to change the country, they find themselves trapped. And that's where we have to find an answer. How do we then change it? The change does not come merely by change of players. It requires by changing the rules of the game. Constitutionally and in terms of political culture, we have to evolve a new political culture. You have to redefine politics. Politics not as business, not as investment with 10 times returns in the next 5 years, transfers, contracts, tenders, police cases and crime investigation, and power projects, and 100 other things. But politics as service, politics as representing people, people as sovereigns, not as subjects. A new political culture is required. If we don't fight for that in the next few years, I'm a great optimist about this country. In the past 10 years, few people articulated India's future with greater conviction than I did. I'm a great believer in the future of this country. And yet, there are dangers ahead.